You don't wake up one morning and decide to become a liability shield for a multinational criminal syndicate. It doesn't happen with a dark oath or a blood sacrifice in a basement in Culiacán. It happens over tacos. It happens with a boy who has grease on his hands and a smile that makes you forget that the dirt road you're standing on has no exit. I've watched this story play out 1,000 times in the shadows of the Sierra Madre. Everyone wants to talk about the boss, the capo, the man who builds the empire. But nobody talks about the architecture of the silence that keeps him there. They don't talk about the woman who signs the checks, the woman who plants the flowers, and the woman who eventually becomes the only currency the government is willing to trade for. If you think this is a story about a gold-plated cage, you're only half right. It's actually a story about the math of survival. It's about how a 17-year-old girl's yes turns into a 30-year-old mother's prison. And by the time you realize the lock is real, you are the one holding the key for someone else's cell. When you're 17 and in love in a town where the only way out is a degree you can't afford, or a truck you shouldn't be in, your brain stops processing red flags. I remember looking at those first envelopes of cash. They don't look like blood money when you're staring at them. They look like electricity bills being paid. They look like your mother's medicine. At 20, the wedding felt like a prophecy. 300 guests, a 12-piece bonda, and enough flowers to bury a small church. I saw my mother crying in the front row. At the time, I thought it was joy. It took me 5 years to realize she was crying because she knew the price of that safety. Mothers in Sinaloa have a different kind of intuition. They recognize the smell of gunpowder even when it's covered in expensive cologne. Don't worry about it. That was the phrase. It's the 3 words that act as the anesthesia for the narco-wife. You see a new truck? Don't worry about it. You see men with rifles in the guest house? Don't worry about it. You see your husband's face on a wanted poster at the gas station? Don't worry about it. I learned to live in the in-between. I wasn't a criminal. I didn't sell the product. I didn't pull the trigger. But I lived in a house, paid for by the people who did. I used the don't worry about it anesthesia until my soul was numb. Nobody talks about this. But the hardest part of being a cartel wife isn't the fear of the police. It's the effort it takes to keep your own blindfold tight. It's a full-time job. You have to actively choose not to see the truth every single morning before you make the coffee. By the time the first child arrives, the blindfold isn't a choice anymore, it's a structural necessity. When I felt that first kick in my belly, the survival math changed. Inside the ranch, my son had a future. He had the best doctors. He had a private tutor. He had a perimeter of guards who would die for him. Outside the ranch, I was a girl with no degree and a last name that would get me killed or kidnapped in 48 hours. People love to judge women who stay in these lives. They call them greedy. They call them complicit. But they don't understand the calculation. When you have a child with a man like that, you aren't just his wife. To your family, you'd just be bringing a target to their front door. So you stay. You plant more flowers. You buy more designer bags to fill the silence. You tell yourself that the gold bars on the windows are there to keep the bad people out, rather than to keep you in. I started developing a skill I call domestic espionage. You learn things when you're the invisible person in the room. I learned that the organization moved $2 billion a year just by listening to the accountant talk to my husband while I was serving lunch. I learned which politicians were friends and which ones were expenses. I didn't want this information. It's heavy. It's radioactive. But in that world, information is the only thing that might buy your life later. I started memorizing phone numbers, not of friends, but of lawyers in Mexico City who specialized in disappearances. I hid cash in the lining of my children's coats, not because I was a criminal, but because I was a mother who knew that the don't worry about it phase of our life was nearing its expiration date. This is the part nobody mentions in the movies. The boss doesn't just want your love. He wants your signature. Sin this, mi amor. It's always presented as a way to protect the family. A real estate development here. A hotel chain there. A foundation for orphans. You sign because you love him. You sign because he's the father of your children. You sign because you've been told for a decade that you are the queen. But here's the net information gain. I learned the hard way. You aren't signing for a hotel. You were signing a confession for a crime you didn't even know was being committed. By putting your name on those shell companies, you become the legal front. If the D comes knocking, they don't go for the man with the gun first. He's too hard to catch. They go for the woman with the signature. I became a liability shield. I was the person who made the business look clean on paper, which meant I was the person who would go to federal prison if the paper got dirty. My husband knew this. The lawyers knew this. Even the guards probably knew it. I was the only one still operating on the don't worry about it anesthesia. But everything I just told you, the money, the fear, the signatures is only half the story. The real issue isn't that you might get arrested. The real issue is that in the world of the cartels, loyalty isn't a feeling. It's a transaction. And when the transaction no longer favors the boss, the queen is the first thing he sells to save his own skin. I realized too late that I wasn't being protected by the empire. I was being raised like a lamb for a future sacrifice. When the raid finally happened, it wasn't like the movies. There were no slow-motion gunfights. There was just the sound of a door being kicked in at 4 a.m. and the cold realization that the security I had paid for with my soul was non-existent. My husband was gone before the first flashbang hit the courtyard. He had a tunnel. Plan. I had a toddler and a signed indictment. I spent 96 hours in a holding cell before I saw a lawyer. And that's when the final betrayal hit. The lawyer wasn't there to get me out. He was there to tell me what my husband had already done, to save himself from extradition to the U.S. My husband had cooperated. He didn't give up his lieutenants. He didn't give up his roots. He gave up the shell companies. My shell companies. He traded my freedom for a reduced sentence in a luxury Mexican prison. He used my signatures, the ones he told me not to worry about, as the evidence the government needed to win their case against the organization's financial wing. He didn't just leave me. He sold me back to the world I thought I had escaped. Now, I live in a 3-bedroom house in a city where nobody knows my name. He cut my hair. I drive a Honda. I am invisible. My son is 12 now, and he looks at me with eyes that are starting to understand the silence. He asks me why we can't go back to the big house. He asks me why his father is a hero on the news but a ghost in our lives. The cruelest inheritance isn't the money or the trauma, it's the silence. I am raising my children in a beautiful fiction, because the truth would destroy them. I have to pretend their father is a businessman. I have to pretend the gods were drivers. I am continuing the don't worry about it legacy because I don't know how to tell a 12-year-old that his father used his mother as a human shield. The world sees the narco-wife and sees a woman who chose the easy life. They see the diamonds in the SUV and they think she knew what she was getting into. But they don't see the 17-year-old girl on the dirt road who just wanted to be loved. They don't see the mother who realized too late that she was just a line item on a balance sheet. I'm sitting at this kitchen table today, and I realize that the debt of that life is never truly paid. It just gets transferred. If you're watching this and you're looking for the glamour, you're in the wrong place. But if you've ever felt like you were building a life on a foundation of, don't worry about it, I want to hear from you. When is a secret too heavy to carry for someone else? And at what point does love become a crime? Let's talk about the cost of the silence in the comments. I'm reading all of them tonight.